This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And for those of you who tune into our various podcasts on Avoid the Maze, you know that we talk about the journey of life. And, sometimes we think that our journey is the only one that is either boring or full of terrible things. That black cloud is hanging over our head and nobody else's. My guest today is Rusty Gaillard, and I met Rusty through podmatch.com. And in his bio, it just struck me as I think I may understand where he's coming from, because he wrote, "I had a career and a life many would envy, but it was crumbling from within." And when it crumbles from within, sometimes we still have that smile on our face and we're dressed for, society. So nobody really knows how much we're falling apart. So tell us a little bit about that, Rusty, because you know what? Life is not smooth sailing for any of us.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, thank you, Karen, for having me here. I'm happy to be here and having this conversation. So my life did really look great from the outside. I was working at Apple at the time. I had a successful career, lived in Silicon Valley. I was married, had a son. It's, all of the things that many of us expect in our lives, right? A family, a job, a place to live, a house, all of that. I had accomplished all of that. And so from the outside, it looked really good. But some of the challenges that I was facing was I had so much of my identity up until that point. I just poured into my work. And I think a lot of people do this in general, and I think men in particular. And I just, everything was about not only the position I was in, but where I was going. And so it's not even like I could be satisfied where I was, because it was all about what's coming next. And it was that forward-looking focus that kind of sank me in my career, because at some point I decided I didn't really want to be pedal to the metal anymore, because it meant not being home and not being a part of my son's life and being a part of my family. And that just became this up until probably my son was, 1 or 2, I guess, maybe around when he was born. I could do it all, right? I could have a good job. I could have a relationship. I could have friends and hobbies. Like, there was enough time for all that. And then once my son was born, I figured out I still wanted to do it all, but it wasn't working in the same way. And so I came up against this really uncomfortable decision of, where am I going to put my focus and energy? And I decided to put it on my family, which meant less progress at work.
So you mentioned that, you're putting your all into your work. Don't you think that work sort of pulled that out of you too? Because knowing the Silicon Valley, when you worked there, my husband worked for Microsoft in their very early days. And even though he worked remotely from Cleveland, he was expected to be available 24/7, like everybody else on the campus. And living in Cleveland, people just didn't understand that. It's like, well, why don't you have a 9-to-5 job? And it would be like, hey, if I want to grow, if I want to keep getting where I want to go, I have to be available. So even though we can put those expectations on us, I think at least up until the last couple of years, business has put that on us as well.
Well, it certainly goes both ways. And I will tell you, I spent a few years living in Cincinnati, and so my friends in Cincinnati used to look at me kind of funny, like, why are you never satisfied? Why are you always trying to do more? Why are you always going for the next thing? And that came from me. So I brought that to the table, but certainly the companies expect and want as much as they can out of you. So if you're willing to work 60 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours, whatever the number is, if you're willing to do it, they will gladly take it, and they will provide plenty of work to keep you occupied during that time.
Exactly. So now your son is born, and now you want to be home a little bit more. You want to be part of his life. You want to have the family that you dreamt about having. So how did that work? I mean, if you were working 60 plus hours a week, it's not easy to cut back to 40.
No, It's not. And so what I did is I changed jobs. I had a big role at Apple. I was leading the global sales forecast. So I was working with people all over the world, figuring out how much of everything we're going to sell. And it felt to me like the kind of job I could not do and still be around. Now, if I had the tools that I have now, I think I had a much better shot at managing that. But I didn't have those tools then. And so the best that I could do was like, I got to make a choice. Either I'm going to be at work and neglect my family, or I'm going to go home and neglect my job. And that was part of this. Just felt like I felt like a failure. I just like that. I wasn't used to having to make that kind of choice. I didn't want to make that kind of choice. I really wanted both of those things. They're both important to me.
Sure.
But I swallowed hard and decided to spend more time with my family. So I was hiring for a job on my team, and I decided that I would take the job that I was hiring for. I basically demoted myself into a lower level job. And that's when all of a sudden, it's not just the job that I'm in, but it's also what's next and my trajectory and where am I going, and all of that just disappeared because I had just stepped off the ladder. And that was a real challenge for me.
I'm sure it was, because when you're driven to take that step back, even though it was your choice, but at the same time, it probably wasn't something you really wanted to have to choose family over work.
Exactly. Yes. So well said. It was my choice, but it was a choice I did not want to have to make.
I totally understand that. And about what time did this happen, year-wise?
So this was around 2009, 2010.
Okay. So the economy was going well. It was a great place to be. I mean, everybody knows Apple. Everybody should have something Apple in their life, and I didn't get paid to say that either, guys. But you were with a company that was very stable. As long as you were doing a good job, you probably could be there, until the day you just like slipped off your chair and they found you under your desk. So what was it like taking that demotion?
It was challenging. I mean, so on the personal side, it was really nice because I could leave work. I could be home with my son. It was a job that had less responsibility than I had been doing. And so I felt like I did not have to put in all of those hours to do the job. I could do the job handily. And so personally, that was really good. But what I've discovered, I observed this about myself, is I never like to talk about work. When you meet friends, they'd say, "Oh, what do you do?" I'd say, "Oh, I work at Apple," and I would quickly change the subject because I didn't feel good about what I was doing and where I was going. Right. I'm doing this job that felt like, well, I'm capable of more than this, and I'm not growing. I don't have this big, I'm not on my way to the next thing. And so, because my identity was so tied up in that, and I didn't want to talk about it. It's like, oh, I'm kind of static and stable. And the idea of sitting in the work and like sliding off my chair someday and like that just felt miserable to me. Just in part because I'm ambitious and I want to do more. And so much of my identity was tied up in that. But in part also just out of the sense of, man, we spend half of our waking hours at work. Do I really want to spend half of my life doing this job, which is a great job, and Apple's a great company. There's so many good things about it, but just treading water, standing still. And that idea for me just really did not sit well. So I was uncomfortable in my job at some level, right? Just in some ways it was very good, but in some ways it was uncomfortable for years. And I just didn't know what to do about it. And that was part of this real uncertainty, and it just felt very uncomfortable for a lot of years. And at some point I just started to say, well, maybe this is just what it is. And maybe I'm just going to be here until I slide off of my chair. But even that just kind of made me feel sick to my stomach. I was like, there's got to be another choice. There's got to be something else I can do. But I didn't know what it was.
And it's interesting because the pandemic sort of opened up that Pandora's box to so many people that, do I need to go back to that same job that I had before that was draining me of any personal time, that was hurting my health, that was destroying my family? Prior to the pandemic, I think we just did all those things because We didn't know any better. And if somebody made the suggestion about changing jobs, I know for me, when it happened, I sort of looked at my husband and my son and I said, well, I can't do that, because I was working at a college. My son's education was being paid for. I actually was slightly higher breadwinner than my husband. And it was like, if I leave, what happens? And I too was putting in all those hours, loved my job, did not like the culture.
Yeah.
And until I realized it was the culture and not the job, that's when I was able to walk away.
Well, I think that what you're saying is so important, because so many people say, I can't go because, right? And if you believe that, if you buy into it, then of course you'll never go, because you've convinced yourself that it's not the right decision. One of the things that the pandemic did for us, which I think makes a difference, is it taught everybody that you can get through something really challenging and difficult.
Yep.
And I had this experience in my own life before the pandemic. I got divorced. So, and it was a huge challenge for me. It was highly contentious. It was going to court and all of this stuff. So it was really uncomfortable, and it went on for years. But the lesson for that for me, the learning I took from that I can survive, I will get through this, and I can land on my feet and be okay, was huge. And that enabled me ultimately to leave Apple and to change my job. And I think what you're talking about, Karen, is the same thing that people have come to realize now, having navigated the pandemic, having said, this was miserable, and it was way harder and longer and more challenging than I ever would have expected it. I remember when we said we have to stay home for a week, and we thought that was crazy, right? I mean, a week. And here we are. But, having navigated that, it gives you this sense of, I can do this. It might be hard, it might be uncomfortable, but I can survive hard and uncomfortable. And that is a huge, huge, powerful lesson that I just hope everybody takes to heart, because you can do amazing things when you give yourself permission and you allow yourself to be a little uncomfortable in doing it, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, for something that turns you on, that lights you up, that makes you excited, that ignites your passion, any of those things.
And when you mentioned that, despite the divorce being so contentious, you learned from it. And that's important for all of us, because sometimes we go through these things and we're just going through the motion and we don't learn. We make the same mistakes over and over again. I know when I went through my divorce back in the 80s, I walked around with blinders on. I just had no concept of what I was doing, how I was doing it. And even years afterwards, I still had this bottled up feeling that I didn't accomplish what I needed to accomplish. And what I needed to accomplish was to dig deep inside myself and say, okay, who are you? Your identity doesn't have to be somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. You have to find your identity so that you can be those things when you need to be, because you're not always in that role. And that's what I see is happening in today's society with individuals like yourself who are saying, wait a second, I never thought I could do this, but I did it. And there may be some things I could have done better, but I'm going to learn from that so that I don't make the same mistakes again.
Yeah, what you're saying again, so important, because it's the lessons you take from it. And from my experience going through divorce, I just highly recommend anyone in that position, find people that you can talk to, whether that's a therapist, a counselor. I formed a group of friends that, we had long, deep conversations about my experience. Have someone who can be there and help support you in that process. It's so important. And I again want to make the comparison back to the pandemic, because, in a way, the pandemic stripped away some parts of our identity.
Absolutely.
When you can no longer go out and go to work and be the person that you are at work, or, to some extent, even like go about freely in the world, whatever that looks like. So, all of these things got stripped away, and you get left with, who am I? And what am I doing here? How am I spending my time? What's important to me? those are such important questions, and struggling with them. And like, I don't think anybody really ever feels confident that they know the answer.
Oh.
Some people might pretend they do, but there's always a doubt. There's always a question. That's human. That's okay. But pick something and move forward, because it's in the movement that you start to get a sense of, how does it feel? Do I like the direction that I'm going in? And progress always feels good as long as you're moving in a direction that matters to you.
And I think it's important for those listening to understand that as you start going down this new path, you're going to take turns, and you're going to turn around and go backwards sometimes, and then you're going to go forward. I find myself sometimes like looking out going, wait a second, this is not where I want to be. And I'll even ask myself, do I have to go this way? Can I turn around? What am I going to gain? What am I going to lose? It's those voices that we hear in our head that everybody says, oh, you must be crazy if you hear voices. No, you want to hear those voices, because those voices help direct us, and they're coming from all the things that we've been through in the past. So when you left Apple, and again, most people are probably listening to this and going, oh my God, he worked for Apple and he left Apple. Oh, how could he do that? I know people said that about my husband when he left Microsoft. But my husband just knew it wasn't for him. He went to Microsoft when he was in his 40s, and everybody else was in their 20s. So it was a double competition for him. But when you left, what then? How do you identify Rusty at that point?
Well, so I left with a purpose. I didn't just walk away. And I think it's important to think about, some people are in a situation that's negative and you just need to walk away. I fortunately was not in that position, as you just described.
Right.
So I didn't want to just walk away. I wanted to walk towards something rather than walk away from something. And I'll take it all the way back to the divorce, which was going through the divorce and finding people to talk to and building relationships and talking to people about what really was going on in my life, my fears, my uncertainties, my insecurities, all of that. Having people that I could talk to about that made a huge difference for me. And that was the beginning of what it is that I'm doing now, which is I'm a coach, and I describe my work as seeing the potential in people and helping them realize it. Because everyone here has just tremendous, tremendous potential. And when you can get out of the, I have to do this, or I can't do that. And you can just step out of that thinking for just a little bit and start to explore what might be, what if. That just opens the door. And it doesn't have to mean you go bolting through that door and rush into this new thing. I mean, I just described a multi-year process, starting with talking to people about my life while I was in the midst of divorce, ultimately deciding I wanted to become a coach, going and getting trained and certified, starting a little business, and then finally walking into my boss and saying, hey, I'm going to leave Apple. And then even staying longer, because even after that first conversation, I didn't leave right away. And I stayed on part-time for a little bit longer. So this was a multi-year process for me to leave. And I just think that's important for people to recognize, that it doesn't have to happen overnight, but start moving. Ask those questions, what if, and start moving. And that's the real privileged thing that I get to do with people now, is help them navigate that journey.
Well, and I think that's so important for all of us to understand. When I was going through my stress in corporate America, I knew there were other things I wanted to do. I was envious of other people who were doing them. And so I was getting more and more angry. Although people didn't know I was angry, but it showed on my face, but didn't show my attitude towards people. But I'd go to bed at night and basically cry myself to sleep, because I was going to have to get up and do the same thing again tomorrow. And that's not where I wanted to be. And when I finally sat down with my husband and my son, and I said, this is what I want to do, they both looked at me and they said, so why aren't you doing it? And my first reaction was, well, I'm not going to make any money, at least initially. And my husband said, yeah, that's tough. And he said, we're going to miss it, but we'll figure it out. And what was interesting was I started spreading the word of what I wanted to do. And a company came to me and asked me if I wanted to do blog posts for them. And it was like, oh, I can do it from home. It was part-time, but it paid very, very well. So it was almost like working full-time. And it was like, if you let it out in the universe, it's going to be heard. Okay. No, I didn't have all the benefits I had. I didn't have a fancy office, but you know what? I started feeling good about me. And when I started feeling better about me, I was better for my husband, my son, and the people around me. Even my mother one day said to me, you're nicer to me. And I realized what she meant, that when I was working 60 hours a week and she would call me and I would tell her, I only have 5 minutes for you. I wasn't being very nice.
Oh, we think that life is all these different compartments, that we have work and we have family and our personal life and all that, but they're all connected. And what you're describing is that connection. When you're unhappy in one place, it affects you in all places of life. And I've just, as you were telling that story, Karen, I'm thinking about two people I've worked with, one of whom was in a high intensity job, working long hours, stressed, worried all the time. And, one of the ways that came out in him was anger and frustration, a little bit like you were describing.
Right.
And that impacted his family. He ultimately left that job and became more of an independent consultant. He made less money doing that, but he was far happier. And, I had a conversation with him. He's like, yeah, I may make a little less money, but my kids are off school next week and I'm not working and I'm going to hang out with them and we get to do things. And, somehow in our head, we think that success is money.
Right.
But really, what is success? What is going to make a good life? So that was one story. And then the other story I thought was so great was a person who was working 60 hours a week and knew he wanted to change that. And he thought in order to change it, he had to change jobs because this is just a requirement of this job. So through the course of our work together, he discovered, I'll skip all the details and I'll just jump to the punchline at the end, which is said, I thought it was about the job, but it wasn't about the job. It was about me because he had discovered he was working less. He always used to go back to work after dinner. So after dinner, he would go back and he would keep working and he stopped doing that. And he said, nothing changed. I'm still getting my work done. I'm still effective. It's like, there's no outside indication that I've stopped doing that work, but I've stopped doing it. And now I'm spending time with my family and I'm happier. He's like, I didn't even change jobs. Right. So I just think that there's elements of this, which is, and we were talking about this earlier. Yes, the company will put that pressure on you. They will want you to work 60 hours. You will think that it is required. But anytime you're saying, I have to do this, you've just got to stop. Anytime you say, I have to, whatever comes after that sentence, just pause. And just because my suggestion is you don't have to. You're choosing to. And if you can change that mentality from I have to do this to I'm choosing to do that, all of a sudden you're saying, why am I making that choice? And you get empowerment to make a different choice.
And, it's funny because there are some days that I barely leave my studio office. But usually on those days, I'm choosing, and I know that I'm choosing to be in there, to do one recording after another, working on website pages, whatever it is. There are other days that I actually will tell my clients, I'm not working today. I'm off, and I would prefer you didn't call me today unless it's an extreme emergency, but it's not going to be an emergency because it's either about the podcast that we're going to record tomorrow or something you need on your website. And we can do that tomorrow. The world is not going to end. And I learned that from having coaches like you on this show, because it's like, those are some of the things I do. I don't want to do those things anymore. How can I change?
And I want to say that one of the things I've been reflecting on this just for myself, when so much of my life is tied up in my work, then what matters is my work. And if I don't have outside things in my life, then it's like all my eggs are in that basket, my work basket. And so when you say, I need you to do something, when my boss says that to me, I'm going to jump because all my eggs are in that basket. But the moment I can start getting a few other baskets and having other interests and really getting clear about putting my time into things that I enjoy, all of a sudden work isn't as important. And so when my boss says, I need you to do something, it's not going to have the same pull, because I'm like, well, yeah, but I've got these other 3 commitments that are all important to me, and they're a part of my life, and life matters. So I have a reason to say no. And my identity is not so connected just to my work. It's connected to more things. And so diversification actually really can help you investing yourself in things that matter, that you enjoy. And it can be going for a walk. It doesn't have to be some fancy thing, right? It's just like, find some things you like doing, baking, cooking, I mean, gardening, it doesn't matter, but find what it is for you that you enjoy, schedule that time into your day. And now you have a reason to say, no, I'm not going to work because I want to go do this other thing that matters to me.
Absolutely. So how do clients find you? I mean, it's interesting that so many of us in the last, I would say 10, 15 years that got a little fed up with all the expectations either we put on ourselves or we thought others were putting on us. We're sort of making that change. A lot of us have become coaches. I'm not a coach, but what I do is I help guide people to coaches. And I do it through the podcasting because, interviewing a number of you, I can tell somebody, Rusty has the excitement, the energy that you need, or Susan is better for you because, and I love doing that. But I tell them, I may not be right. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 names and I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
But I don't want people just to go throwing a dart, at the wall and say, oh, I choose you. So how do people find you?
Primarily through word of mouth and through networking. So in terms of social media, the only place you'll find me active is on LinkedIn. But I send out a weekly newsletter. Happy to connect with people by email as well. But I really rely on the personal connections because that's what makes a difference.
Absolutely. And that's why I started doing this guidance, because I've heard some people that have come on our program and have said, I worked with this counselor, this coach for 6 months, and I'm nowhere near where I want to be. And I'll ask certain questions like, are you being open? Are you vulnerable to change? How did you select this person? And typically it's not by word of mouth. It's something that either popped up on their screen or somebody just said, hey, I heard this guy talking and you may want to connect with them. So what I'm hoping for our listeners is that they will hear your words, understand where you're coming from, and know that a coach who has been through this is very valuable because you're going to be able to walk in our shoes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing I encourage everyone listening to just take away from this is, for some people, the right answer is to change your job. And for other people, it has nothing to do with changing your job. It's about how you're showing up in your job and the other things you're doing outside your job. The story I gave about the guy who just started working less and was just as effective at work. And all of a sudden his life is better because now he gets to spend time with his family and do other things that are important to him. And by the way, when he does that, he's more energized, he's more creative, and he brings all of that back into work. And so he's more effective in his job. So I'm a huge believer there's no right path for anybody, but your path is there. And it's, one of the things I really enjoy doing and I'm good at is helping people find that path and then walk down it.
Well, life has a lot of energy and we've got to use that energy to go forward. I know there are some people who are listening to this and they may be sitting on their couch and thinking, I can't change. There are other people who may be out there walking and doing the healthy thing, listening and saying, oh, maybe I can do something a little extra. Whatever it is, we can't be stagnant, because once we become stagnant, we take the joy out of waking up in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, when I wake up in the morning, and I'm not a good sleeper, but I don't get upset and go, oh, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm wide awake. Okay, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm wide awake. I'm not going to sleep anymore. So what do I choose to do? And sometimes it's work, sometimes it's binge watching, sometimes it's reading, sometimes it's just, taking a walk around the house and coming back and laying down in bed again and, falling asleep. We have those choices. It's up to us to take them.
Mm-hmm.
So you are on LinkedIn, you said. If somebody wanted to email you, can we put your email address in the show notes?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Because you have a lot of energy. But the last question I want to ask you, how did this change your relationship with your son?
My relationship with my son is just so much better. It's how to describe that. I just think that all of my relationships, I've just come forward. So I've also in the meantime gotten remarried, and I'm more confident and clear about who I am and what I believe, and willing to say that and be myself. I guess that's the easiest way to say it.
And that's wonderful, because if you're liking yourself, other people are going to like you too. That makes a big difference. When you don't like yourself, people notice it. Why should they like you?
Yeah.
So keep doing the good work, Rusty. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks,
Have
Karen.
a great day. Bye-bye now.